Every year, foreign businesses purchase billions of dollars of U.S. agricultural products. Exporting these products, or any product, involves many people, numerous transactions, and critical paperwork. It's a business of details, and attending to the details can make or break an export venture. Taiwan is one of the largest importers of lettuce from the United States. Not long ago, this lettuce was growing on a farm in California. How did it get to Taiwan in a timely manner and in good condition? We'll find out as we follow a shipment of romaine lettuce from a California farm to a market in Taiwan. While tracking this lettuce, we'll highlight many critical aspects of exporting agricultural products. For instance, this shipment of lettuce is based on a cost, insurance, and freight quote, CIF. It's also based on using a confirmed, irrevocable letter of credit and being transported in a refrigerated container, first by truck and then ocean carrier. Not every product is shipped under these terms and conditions, but no matter what the product, 4 critical elements dictate the details of each shipment. The product being shipped, the country's requirements, that includes the United States and the foreign country where the product is destined, the buyer's requirements, and the requirements of the seller or exporter. It's the exporter's responsibility to know the technical requirements for their product and to determine the appropriate terms and conditions for each shipment. In an effort to gain a better understanding of this complex process, we'll focus on 5 major players and their roles in exporting. Chuck Schreiber, the exporter or seller and managing director of Saka Trading. John Giannini, the freight forwarder from W.J. Burns & Company. Steve Herrick, senior trade manager, Bank of the West. Bob Roach, Monterey County Assistant Agricultural Commissioner. And Johnny Lynn, the buyer or consignee and senior manager of Three Shine Trading Company. Each will discuss his role as we follow the shipment from the field and packing house in California through inland and ocean transportation to clearance and distribution in Taiwan. Market research is the first step in exporting. It's important to identify where the markets exist for your product and understand some key attributes of those markets.
One of the things that I have found is that when you're doing market research is what is the taste of that market? What are their cultural preferences? Do they have taste for your products in general? But really the key is to ask customers what their preferences are. Do they like smaller type product? Do they like, if you're dealing with almonds, do they want a jumbo size? Do they want the small size? Those type of things. If it's asparagus, do they want pencil counts or do they want large or extra large or jumbos? Those are the type of things you need to ask your receiver before you ship. Our product is specialized, it's fresh vegetables. So for us, it was a big part was cold chain and refrigeration. I remember the first time we went into Hong Kong, they were still using wet markets primarily 99% of the time. Not a lot of refrigeration, so we had to determine whether we really wanted to send our product in there knowing that it's going to be sitting outside most of the time and what that would do. And so is that going to change the preference or taste of our product for the consumer, because they were being introduced to it for the first time. So that was a big factor.
Determining the importing country's requirements is a key part of market research.
You need to go to your county ag department and ask the county inspectors, what do you have on your website that show what the requirements are? They can bring those up for you and say that you have to have an import permit or you have to be free from certain insects before they will allow your product into that country.
Well, the shipper needs to know, in the first place, is the product certifiable? Is it permitted to be imported into that country? And if it is, what the restrictions are. It may need a simple inspection and certification for freedom from pests and diseases. It may require an import permit. The success of the shipper's program really depends on knowing the requirements of the importing country. They should contact their local agricultural commissioner's office or the nearest office of USDA APHIS. Let them know the commodity, its origin, and where they intend to export it to. And they will research it using the USDA Phytosanitary Export Database.
Once you've done some investigation, it's time to identify specific customers. Recognize that this process doesn't happen overnight.
Whenever you're looking at new customers or a new market to export in, one of the first questions you need to ask yourself is, are you ready to make a commitment? Doing some research, know that market before you ship, and then don't be afraid to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes along the way. The key is that when a mistake is made, that you deal with it with your customer and look at the long term. What are both of your plans for this product line and how to grow the market?
There are a number of ways to locate customers. A good place to start is with the USDA Foreign Agricultural Service. They have information on customers around the world. Other sources include the Department of Commerce's Foreign Commercial Service, state departments of agriculture, or your industry trade association. Trade shows are another way to meet customers.
We usually attend the agricultural trade show, for example, PMA in the USA. Also, we will attend to the trade show in other country. And normally, we will visit our supplier every year.
One of the best ways to get customers list or people introduced to you is by going to food shows or really getting your product out there. And one of the advantages I like about that is that you get a lot of people to come to one area and one venue at one time. I think when you're looking at trade leads, one of the best things to use is your local or state departments because they have a lot of leads. What we try to do is we try to accommodate tours when they become available. So we're always trying to accommodate people to come and see our facilities, to see how we do things, because that opens up your products to that consumer base. And a lot of times a good source of that information is your state ag departments or your county ag departments.
Once you've located a customer, both Johnny and Chuck recommend checking each other's credentials before doing business.
We always want to cooperate with the supplier that can meet Taiwan import regulation. It's very important for our business.
Really is do they have a history? I mean, do they have experience handling your product? A lot of people want to handle your product, but if they've never handled fresh vegetables or grapes per se or whatever that product may be, are they the best person suitable for your product?
Once both parties decide to do business, a negotiation phase can begin. But before these details are solidified, many exporters will consult with a freight forwarder.
Well, a freight forwarder is essentially someone who's an expert in moving cargo from point A to point B. Think of a freight forwarder as a travel agent for cargo. You have a specific origin and you have a specific destination, and the freight forwarder will use the appropriate means to get that cargo to the destination within the required time frame.
Finding a good freight forwarder is I feel just like anything else. It's reputation. Who out there has a good reputation in shipping product, who handles perishable type items, especially with our product line. And then going to visit them. And don't limit yourself just to one freight forwarder because that's their reputation. Go and visit a few. But one of the things I look for, again, is their infrastructure, how they receive product, how they handle product, because that's just as important, because you must remember that if you're shipping to an airline, on an airline, and that freight forwarder is the last one to receive your product before it gets onto that airline.
The ideal way is to be brought in before a deal ever happens so that your freight forwarder can really work with you on what Incoterms are acceptable and everyone understands what their responsibilities and liabilities are in terms of moving the cargo from point A to point B. If we're brought in during negotiations, we can also kind of help steer the exporter in the right direction in terms of this is a bad Incoterm for you to be working on. This one's actually more beneficial for your specific deal. And then other times we're brought in after a transaction is done. A letter of credit already has the Incoterms and the freight stipulations in there, and a freight forwarder is left to kind of really match what's on the letter of credit, because those things are going to be required for the exporter to meet in order for them to get paid. So it's really better for us to be brought in ahead of time.
A key element in any export transaction is the Incoterm used. Incoterms are a set of international rules for the interpretation of the most commonly used trade terms in foreign trade.
The Incoterm clearly identifies who's responsible and liable for any function that goes into an international transaction. What determines who's responsible is the Incoterm, whether it's going to be the seller's expense or the buyer's expense. So included in any type of freight quote will be essentially all of those components, being a truck pulled from an ocean freight terminal to the exporter's facility, loading, the tendering the loaded cargo back to the ocean freight terminal, the actual ocean freight, as well as any terminal handling charges at destination. There's really a lot of costs associated in an international transaction, and whatever you ask your freight forwarder to quote, they'll provide those costs to you.
Effective communication between the exporter and buyer during this negotiation phase is critical in order to avoid misunderstandings later on.
When negotiating a shipment with an export customer for the first time, one of the big factors and key is communication. Having direct contact with that customer. And really remembering that that doesn't just mean email too. You have to pick up the telephone and discuss your business with that customer. One of the other factors is pricing. Did you come up to a fair price that you both considered and are fair to both parties and you agreed upon? I mean, if it's a new customer, again, you're probably set up with an LC of some type or a prepayment plan. You don't know who this customer is and do they have any experience. This is your first time shipping to them.
Getting paid is one of the most important factors to consider in choosing a customer. For new exporters, the assistance of an international banker is crucial.
Well, the most important thing is that if you are selling things overseas, you're going to have money come from overseas to your account here in the States. So your first contact has to be a bank account with a bank. The way you choose a bank for what you need is a part of that whole research process. You know, if you're selling overseas, you've researched your market, and in the process, if you're using a bank, the bank that you need, for starters, as I think I said earlier, for starters, you need a bank that has experience doing international business.
With an international banker and freight forwarder on board, the negotiation can move forward. The buyer issues a request for quotation or a purchase order. Saka Trading responds to the request by preparing a pro forma invoice. In this document, the exporter spells out the details of the transaction.
So after you've come to terms with your customer in shipping your product, possibly your customer now is going to issue a purchase order. And that determines now that the order's been accepted, the price has been agreed upon, and you're ready to ship. So you will then print out a pro forma invoice with the product type, the quantity, and the cost, and then the total cost of the product, and provide that to your customer.
This document includes all the important information. The terms of payment. For instance, this transaction will be using a confirmed irrevocable letter of credit. It also includes the price. And for new exporters, it's recommended to quote in U.S. dollars to reduce foreign exchange risk. It includes the terms of sale, in this case, CIF, destination port, meaning cost, insurance, and freight, Kaohsiung, Taiwan, based on the International Chamber of Commerce Incoterms.
So it's very important to start looking at your documents with your freight forwarder to really go over them and make sure that all the numbers match up, make sure the product descriptions match up, as well as the Incoterms, and anything that's really stipulated in those documents are all consistent.
Most foreign governments require some type of certification that the exported product is free from harmful pests and diseases. For fresh, unprocessed fruits, nuts, and vegetables, a phytosanitary certificate is usually necessary.
Prior to being exported, certain commodities require phytosanitary certification for freedom from pests and diseases. The Agricultural Commissioner can offer phytosanitary inspection and certification services, and our inspectors are qualified to issue federal phytosanitary certificates, which we generally call phytos. So if an exporter has any questions at all about how to export product, they should just contact their local agricultural commissioner's office, and they'll walk them through the whole process and tell them what they need to know.
While this product is being shipped under a letter of credit, or LC, there are several different methods of payment in international transactions.
Yeah, the major ways you're going to get paid for your transaction is that you can either get a wire transfer to pay for your funds, you can get a documentary collection, or a letter of credit. Transfer of funds is really the safest way, especially if you still have the goods and the buyer is going to send you the money in advance, okay? With a documentary collection, you send the goods over to the foreign country. The documents go to the bank. And then, of course, probably the most secure way of getting paid is with a letter of credit. And the letter of credit is a very relatively complex document, but if you have a letter of credit in your favor from an acceptable bank, you will get paid. So your risk is really minimized under a letter of credit.
The importer uses the pro forma invoice to prepare the import permit from the Taiwan government, if required, and then takes these documents to their bank to apply for the letter of credit. The letter of credit is sent to Saka Trading at this time, and, depending on the Incoterms, the shipping is arranged.
The shipping is always arranged by our exporter. Actually, we always do business with CNF terms.
The freight forwarder will then arrange proper equipment, whether it be a 20-foot container, a 40-foot container, or a refrigerated container, should that be the case, or alternatively air freight if that's required. Generally, once we get a packing list and a commercial invoice or a letter of credit, we will then make arrangements to have the right equipment brought from the ocean terminal to an exporter's facility, have it loaded, and get it on a ship that meets the time frame and specific requirements stipulated in those documents.
While this has been happening, the exporter has been getting the product ready for shipment. This entire process starts at the field where the lettuce is carefully grown and harvested.
The first thing in shipping export is starting out with the right stuff. You got to have the quality. If you're having issues with product maybe that has some defects already in the field, you probably don't want to ship anything from that lot. You probably want to look to a field or a product line that has the best grade, depending on what you're shipping. So if you're shipping citrus, you're going to ship US #1 Fancy, and you're not going to ship Choice unless you're going to a juice processor. But if it's for the fresh market, you're going to want to start off with your best stuff.
Many exporters recommend getting a quality inspection certificate, even if it's not required by law. The certificate is evidence that the product was in good condition at the time it was loaded and can be useful in the event of a claim. In addition, as most importing countries are concerned about chemical residues on imported product, the seller should work with the buyer to determine the maximum residue levels, or MRLs, for any chemical applications to the product. It is often a good idea to have product samples checked by a lab if there is any question on whether the product will meet the importing country's MRL restrictions.
There's different things that we have to set up for shipping for export in that because of the transit time, and it's going to be on the water for quite a bit. And they can get into inclement weather where seas are rough and things aren't going their way. So we have to take special precaution in the way we load. So what we do is we put extra maybe tie downs or corner boards to secure the pallets to make sure that they're not shifting in transit. Also, the containers themselves come with their own temperature control units. But our temperature recorder that we put in is just a safety valve to determine whether the container ran properly. And really, you only get into that if the customer starts looking at product right away and they find quality issues. The first thing we want to look at is, did the container maintain its temperature throughout the voyage? Upon shipping, some countries may require a seal, and what that is that's just a little seal that goes in the back of the door when the door container shuts and locks. You apply a little seal and you lock it. It's like a little plastic strap that straps up, but it has a number on there. And so you put that seal number on documents.
An export box destined for Taiwan contains more product and weighs more than a domestic pack. So Saka Trading uses a larger and stronger box designed specifically for Far East markets. When the reefer container arrives at the packing house, the palletized product is loaded and one or more temperature recording devices are attached throughout the container.
If there are added costs, someone has to pay. If you're the exporter, you don't want to get stuck harboring those. So it's important to really know where your risk and liability and responsibility are going to be in an international deal.
According to the Incoterms, if this shipment is sold ex-works named place, in this case the packing house, with a seller agreeing to load the container, the buyer would bear all the costs and risks involved in moving the product from the packing house to the final destination in Taiwan. The seller determines the ex-works packing house price of the product by adding together a number of costs. First, product cost is determined by multiplying the cost per unit times the number of units or cost per box of lettuce times the number of boxes in the shipment. To this number, any of the following costs are added as they apply to the shipment: profit or markup, commissions, banking fees, palletization, freight forwarding and documentation fees, USDA grading and phytosanitary inspection fees, and temperature recorder charges. This total equals the ex-works packing house price. When the truck arrives at the port, the bill of lading number is the instrument utilized to identify the entire shipment, the shipper, the consignee, the vessel voyage, and the carrying conditions. Other documents, such as the waybills and USDA certificates, are collected at that time. Now that the loaded container is at the port, if the product were sold FAS name port of shipment, meaning free alongside ship Oakland, the buyer would assume all responsibility for risk and costs from this point forward. The FAS price quoted by the seller would include the ex-works packing house price plus the cost of inland transportation. If the product were sold FOB port of shipment, meaning free on board Oakland, the responsibility for costs and risks are transferred to the buyer when the container crosses the ship's rail as it is loaded on board the vessel. The FOB price charged by the seller would include the total FAS price plus terminal handling charges. It's not unusual for there to be confusion between buyer and seller over who pays the terminal handling charges. According to the Incoterms, the buyer pays terminal handling charges for an FAS shipment, and the exporter pays these charges for an FOB shipment. To avoid any misunderstanding, you can spell out in the commercial invoice or the letter of credit who's responsible for paying the terminal handling charges. With the container now stowed on board the vessel, the carrier can prepare the bill of lading.
The bill of lading can be generated by your freight forwarder or the steamship line. A bill of lading is actually a legal document that basically says, I am taking possession of your goods and I agree to move them from origin to destination. It is actually something that you must present at destination. You actually surrender the bill of lading to your buyer at destination, and they are able to then collect the goods.
With the vessel now at sea, freight charges are incurred. To quote a price that includes the cost of freight, there are two terms of sale commonly used: cost and freight port of destination, referred to as CFR. The other term is cost insurance and freight port of destination, or CIF. In a CFR quote, the cost of ocean transportation is borne by the seller, but the buyer is responsible for loss or damage to the product during transport. To determine the CFR price quote, the exporter adds to the FOB price the ocean freight charges and any ancillary charges, such as a bunker or fuel adjustment factor and a currency adjustment factor.
So CFR and CIF stand for cost and freight and cost, insurance, and freight. They're two different Incoterms. And obviously insurance is the component in CIF that CFR does not have. So one of the benefits to having cargo insurance on your container is that you will be made whole by your insurance company right away, and their legal team will then file suit against the steamship line. In the other case, if you have CFR as your Incoterm, you're then responsible for hiring a lawyer and then fighting the steamship lines on your own. So it's beneficial to have insurance, and it's relatively cheap.
The seller can calculate the CIF price quote by taking the total CFR price and adding the cost of insurance to it. Or, in review, the CIF price is determined by totaling all of the costs incurred in the process of exporting the product to the port of destination.
A lot of exporters think that because the carrier has some type of insurance for their cargo and something does happen to their container in transit, that they're covered and that they can be made whole in the event of a disaster. In fact, it couldn't be farther from the truth. Carriers are really only have liability of about $500. And all risks marine cargo insurance really ensures that the full value of the commodities that you have in that container that you can be made whole for in the terms of in the event of a disaster or something happens to your cargo.
With the cargo at sea, the documents, which are called the commercial set, are transferred between the seller, the buyer, and their respective banks to ensure that there are no problems upon arrival or in the payment process. The commercial set typically contains the bill of lading, the commercial invoice, the packing list, an insurance certificate, if applicable, and any ancillary certificates required by the importing country.
So once all the documents have been finalized, your commercial invoice, your packing list, the bill of lading, as well as your compliance documents, they will then need to be couriered over to your buyer or your buyer's customs broker. Many times the original documents are required for customs clearance, as well as that original bill of lading is the legal document by which you surrender title to your buyer.
The confirming bank, meaning the exporter's bank in the United States, reviews the commercial set. If all the documents are in order, the bank pays the exporter in accordance with the letter of credit.
Once the bank says the documents are conforming, you are going to get paid. Now, when you get paid depends a little bit on how the letter of credit is written. It can be 2 days, it can be 3 days, it can be 10 days, depending on what the reimbursement instructions are within the letter of credit. But if the documents are found to be in order, you are going to get paid.
Before the vessel arrives in Taiwan, the exporter's bank sends the approved commercial set with the original documents to the buyer's bank or issuing bank and collects payment from them. Then, in a typical transaction, the issuing bank collects payment from the buyer in exchange for the commercial set, which acts as title to the shipment. If the documents are found to be in order, the issuing bank will release the cargo into the importer's possession. Before the buyer takes possession, the shipment must clear Taiwan customs. A customs officer will review all the documents for completeness and accuracy, and possibly inspect the actual product for compliance with Taiwan health and phytosanitary regulations. If there's a problem with the product, the first thing the buyer checks is the container's temperature recording device and the recorders inserted in the load by the exporter. With that completed, they notify the exporter that there's a problem.
The delay of shipping schedule and the congestion in the container terminal gates will be two main problems. First, we will check in the shipping line, and if necessary, we will call the third party to have a joint survey.
One thing you have to remember is that a deal is not done until the cargo actually arrives on time, in good condition, and without added costs.
In the case of this shipment, no claim was necessary. The product arrived in good condition. The buyer was satisfied. The lettuce was sold in the Taiwan market, and the exporter was paid in, all because everyone involved in the process paid attention to the details.